So I'm going to start this sermon in a little bit of an unorthodox manner, but no one's ever accused me of being orthodox, so I'm going to quote from the New Testament. And I'll take wisdom wherever I can get it, as you all know. So a wise teacher once said that there are 4 words that you can say on any occasion. This too shall pass. And the student asked him, really? Really? Any occasion? The teacher said, yeah. So would you go up to a bride at her wedding reception and say to her, this too shall pass? And the teacher said, absolutely. It's precisely the couples who understand that the exhilaration of the wedding day will soon pass who go on to have the most successful marriages. Since I arrived at Temple Bethel in 1987, I've delivered a total of 134 high holiday sermons. Some of you have counted them. There are 4 to go. Our honeymoon ended years ago, but an incredible marriage has endured. And at no moment did I fail to realize that someday this too would pass. And that day has arrived. 36 years ago, double chai, my journey and yours came together. It seems like forever, and it has been a long time. Just to give you an idea of how long it's been, 1 month after my opening night here, Les Mis opened on Broadway. And that run, when it closed on Broadway, was the second longest in Broadway history, and it closed 20 years ago, May of 2003. I came here just as President Reagan was in Berlin saying, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. Now you can buy a piece of the wall on eBay. Barbie was quite the rage back then, but it was Klaus Barbie, the butcher of Lyon, who was convicted of war crimes right around that time. The doll has had some recent legal problems, but genocide is not among them. Maybe the worst thing she ever did was wear white after Labor Day. The Golden Girls won the Best Comedy, the Emmy. The actresses who starred actually were much younger than the roles they played, but they're all dead now. Though Betty White, God bless her, had quite a run till last year. This was a long time ago. My pension director tells me that maybe only a dozen conservative rabbis in this country have remained with their congregations for this length of time. It is a tiny pool, too small for any survey to accurately measure. And the pool is shrinking. It just doesn't happen anymore. And I'm not talking about work habits of, Gen Z or millennials. It just doesn't happen. No one seems to want it or to be able to do it. And once upon a time, such stability was the norm. It was the gold standard for a congregation. Now research has shown that most pastors vacate a pulpit between the years 3 and 5 if they last that long. But somehow we bucked those odds. It wasn't easy, but it is easy to take that remarkable accomplishment for granted. I certainly don't. I'm totally aware that this is not just any old goodbye. I've even brought some tissues to pass around if people need them. And for many of you, it may be as hard for you, or maybe even harder than it is for me. After all, I'll get to see me every day. But I won't see all of you. So we are a unicorn. I say we because this is as much your accomplishment as mine. In this congregation's 102-year history, there have been essentially just 3 senior rabbis. with a few short-term flameouts mixed in. And I understand that for each of you, this transition is something different. I've known some of you for 30 years and others for 2 weeks, but they've been 2 good weeks. And now each of our clocks is synchronized as we count down inexorably towards 0. And as lengthy as this journey has been, it's also passed like the blink of an eye. "How long is forever?" asked Alice, to which the white rabbit replied, "Sometimes just 1 second." Sometimes forever feels like 1 second. TBE has been blessed with long-term clergy, but a 37-year run has never happened before. And I said before, it almost never happens anywhere. So that leaves us as among the only ones who've experienced what it's been like to have prayed, cried, and laughed together since before Jean Valjean first stole the loaf of bread at the Broadway Theater. But no time to dwell on nostalgia. Life is passing us by. Time's a fleeting. According to my official handy-dandy CNN countdown clock, we have exactly 288 days, 12 hours, 32 minutes, and 7 seconds until next June 30th at midnight. Make that 31 minutes and 58 seconds. So no time to waste. So today let's talk about time, what it means for all of us to be stewards of the clock, and how we can look at time differently. So I'll give you a little history. You know much of it, but some may not. I loved my childhood. In Brookline, Mass, it was my little shtetl. I loved it. I wanted everything to stay exactly as it was. When I was a kid, I learned that the biblical Joshua made the time stand still, the sun. And I wanted to do the same. For my bar mitzvah, I got my first digital clock. It was one of those, no, not an LED screen, but a flip clock. You may have had one of those because you couldn't get to sleep with it. You know, you'd hear each minute flip over like the old What's My Line? The cards would flip over. And so as I lay in bed, I was keenly mindful and aware of the passage of time. I could literally hear it, but I had no idea how brief my childhood would be. My youth was shattered forever at age 21 when my father's heart stopped. Just 2 days earlier, my parents, 2 days earlier, they had closed on my childhood home. My father took us to that borderline to overlook the promised land of change. And 2 months later, while we were still in mourning, my mother moved out of that home, and that was that. I still carry the key to that home in my pocket right now. So exiled from Anatevka and my childhood innocence, and since I could no longer stop time, I was now determined to outrace it, always keeping my foot on the gas. I graduated from Brown in 3 years to save my parents a few bucks. They don't even let you do that anymore. I rushed into rabbinical school without hesitation. Gap years were not really an option for me back then. And then my father died suddenly right at that period, my first year at JTS, so there really wasn't time to reflect or even to leave if I wanted to. So I stayed at the seminary and I studied rabbinics by day, and by night I took the Broadway local down to NYU to earn my journalism degree. 2 full-time graduate programs simultaneously. By age 26, with a rabbinic ordination in one hand and a master's in journalism in the other, I looked for ways to combine the 2 careers. I interned at the Daily News, I freelanced articles at major publications, and soloed at pulpits in New York State. And at age 30, you hired me. 5 years later, I became the senior rabbi, very young for a place like this. But I was more than ready, and always in a hurry, and I never stopped running against the clock. And then the years passed so quickly. We added one kid, and another, and a dog, and another, and another, and another, and another. I partnered with all-star cantors, great educators, administrators, staff, and lay leaders. All the while, I never stopped to smell the roses. No break, no sabbatical, no real days off. Non-stop. Felt like a line out of Hamilton. Why do you write like you're running out of time? Write day and night like you're running out of time. Actually, more like a Purim song. Hava Narisha. I have them so well trained. Hava Narisha. You know, now you're completing my sentences. This is great. I can't believe how quickly our time together has passed. I can't believe how quickly my life has flashed. My stepping off the hamster wheel next July may not make the wheel go much slower, but it certainly couldn't go any faster. But enough about me. This sermon is really not about me. That's next week's. So let me talk about you. Us, really. Us and time. We are a generation obsessed by the clock. We can't stand still. We can't slow down. We live in a permanent state of spilkus. I know that whenever I run into traffic on the Merritt Parkway, which is any time I'm on it except for 3 a.m., I feel claustrophobic. I know every side road between here, Norwalk, and Greenwich to get off the Merritt. We always need to be moving forward, at least to create the illusion of moving forward. Robert Pirsig wrote in his novel Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, "We're in such a hurry most of the time, we never get much chance to talk. The result is sort of an endless day-to-day shallowness, a monotony that leaves a person wondering years later where all the time went, and sorry, it's all gone. And it's all on us. We're overpowered by the need for productivity. We are on 24/7. By the way, that's the way it's always been for clergy, for rabbis, but now everyone's a rabbi. Welcome to my world. No one has real vacations anymore. We all think that by the sheer intensity of our activity, if we accomplish more things, that somehow will make things better. But things aren't better. We've lost our way. We've lost track of time, and our lives have been derailed. Does anybody really know what time it is? Does anybody really care about time? If so, I can't imagine why. We've all got time enough to cry. Our culture, our music, everything, there is an obsession with time. But there were two things that could never be dominated by the clock. Two things: Shabbat and baseball. Ah, yes, baseball. None of us has much to talk about with baseball these days, but no one had the patience to watch it anymore. So this year they brought in the pitch clock, and people loved it, which is terribly depressing, and I love it, which is even more depressing. We've all lost patience. So just, first, I'm thinking of bringing the idea into services. No, not for sermons. Please. For Aliyahs, when the Kohen comes up to the Torah, I start the clock. You got to get into that batter's box and kiss that Torah. If you don't finish the blessing in 20 seconds, a shofar will sound, the next person will be called up, and for you, better luck next year. How about hamotzi? If you don't eat the challah within 10 seconds of saying the blessing, you're out of luck. We'll give you a piece of kichel instead. By the way, this is the only cookie ever sent back by the Sahara Desert because it was too dry. We're actually on the clock for lots of Jewish rituals. When you escape danger or complete a long journey, there's a prayer called the Gomel blessing. It has to be recited within 3 days. There's actually also a prayer that you say after going to the bathroom when you wake up in the morning called Asher Yatzar, which is a lovely idea to appreciate the complexity, the sacred complexity of our bodies. But you got to say the prayer within a half hour after you've gone. Why a half hour? I have no idea. Some say it's because you may have to go again. For Sephardim, by the way, it's 72 minutes. I have no idea why. Draw your own conclusions. But I can imagine the Talmudic discussion, but if you have no Lysol, you can wait an hour and a half. The point is, the clock is always running. Even for blessings, we're always on the clock. And don't I know it? 288 days, 12 hours, 22 minutes, and 48 seconds. Okay, so we all agree that baseball needs to get faster. But in general, why do we have less tolerance for things that take longer, like services in conservative synagogues? So we're supposed to throw out prayers that we've been reciting for 2,000 years, and the answer is yes. Didn't bother my great-grandparents, but it seems to bother our brains because we're moving faster now. We need to speed things up, just like television commercials need to speed things up, just like we Google everything we don't know so that we'll know it within seconds, just like traffic needs to speed up, just like meals need to be zapped, just like information needs to flow. We play videos and podcasts at 1.5 speed so everyone sounds like a chipmunk. Everything goes faster. Vacations go faster, careers go faster, life needs to go faster. Everyone is on a fast track to nowhere. Here's the paradox. We're so sidetracked by all the multitasking. We're so busy being busy that we've lost control of time. And we've started to neglect the things we should be doing, that have to be done. Everything whizzes by so quickly that we're procrastinating the things that we should be doing, the I love you to a partner or child, the phone call to a sick relative, the volunteer project. There's always something else to do, and just we're about to do it, and suddenly something pops up on our banner on the screen, interrupting our train of thought. Now, I am a notorious procrastinator. I wrote this sermon yesterday. Not really, but you know how Hillel said, if not now, when? My motto is, if not now, later. Why are we in such a hurry? The more we rush, the more time outruns us. A day, a month, a year, 525,600 minutes, and time keeps on slipping beyond our grasp. We need to look at time differently. And here's how. This gift was given by an artist at my prior congregation, and it's been hanging in my office since the day I moved in. I reflect on it every day. It's a verse from Psalm 90, Limnot Yamenu Ken Hoda V'Navi Levav Chachma. Teach us how to count our days, that we may obtain a heart of wisdom. You know, note that the translation doesn't say, teach us to count our days. We already do that. But rather, how to count our days, how to have new strategies that we may escape the tyranny of time. Teach us how to count our days rightly. So I'm going to share a few ways to do that this morning, how we could confront that counting of days in a way that can count for us. So let's start with this. Psalm 90 is, I think, the wisest of all the Psalms. It was the only one ascribed to Moses. And it says near the beginning, these are familiar lines to some of us, the span of our life is 70 years, or given the strength 80. But the best of them are trouble and sorrow. They pass by speedily in darkness. Now that could be speaking of death, but I think it really is speaking of death during life. That life passes by in a flash, but only if we live in darkness, only if we sleepwalk through life. That's when we become prisoners of the clock. The psalm is saying we can't allow ourselves to put our one wild and precious life on autopilot. So message 1 of that psalm, wake up, live mindfully. Message 2, look at time through heaven's eyes. It asserts, for in your sight 1,000 years are like yesterday that has passed, a watch of the night. Now, in our sources, a watch in the night is considered the shortest span of time measurable, equivalent to what we would call an instant. In other words, the length of our life's journey is unbelievably brief in comparison to eternity, whether we live 120 years or 120 seconds. 1,000 years is nothing from a God's eye view. It's humbling for sure, but in a strange way hopeful to look at time as God would. So let's do that. Let's zoom out and see what God sees, the very, very big picture. What's it like to flash forward 1,000 years or 10,000? The rabbis brilliantly managed to make a square peg out of our lunar calendar fit into the round hole of the seasons by adding an extra month 7 times in every 19-year cycle. In this way, Passover would always occur in the spring in the northern hemisphere and Rosh Hashanah in the early fall. But here's where it gets fun and where we can zoom out a little. The calculations were off, just a little bit. So Passover is getting later by 1 day every 231 years on the Gregorian calendar, and eventually will fall in June, which is no problem because it feels like June in March now. And using these calculations and planning way ahead, because if you're God, you got to plan way ahead, in the secular year 22,203, which corresponds to the Jewish year 25,963, for the first time, Rosh Hashanah will fall on January 1. And we'll get 2 New Years for the price of 1, which will be very convenient for anyone who might celebrate a little too much the night before and need to repent the next day. And I could see that big apple in Times Square just being dropped into a huge vat of honey. It'll be spectacular. And if this God's eye view is making you a little dizzy, let's reel it in a bit to the Gregorian year 6242, which corresponds to the Jewish year 10,000, just 4,219 years away. That's the first time Yom Kippur will coincide with Halloween. We'll be able to go straight from break the fast to trick or treat, or maybe combine them. Everyone will gather at that haunted house down the street, and instead of M&Ms, they'll give out kugel and pickled herring. Looking at time from a God's eye view forces us to ask some difficult questions. Will there even be an America 4,000 years from now? Will the high holidays be celebrated on Mars that year? We have no idea whether we'll have an inhabitable planet in 40 years, much less 4,000, which is why this exercise calls on us to be like the Iroquois nation, looking at the impact of every decision we make today on the 7th generation. But we do know one thing. We all know that in 4,000 years, Eileen Rosner will still be dressing the Torahs. And we know exactly when Rosh Hashanah will begin in the year 6242. It'll begin when the sun sets. Jewish time will still be governed by the rhythms of nature. When you look up at the sky, not at your phone or in that chip implanted in your brain by then, you'll know what time is. You'll know what time it is, and you'll care about time. Just as we know that today is Shabbat because we aren't blowing shofar, because God rested and allowed the world to breathe for 1 day, and we slow down and breathe too, and that's what happens when we take a God's eye view. But we relinquish our God's eye view, and before we do, I want to add one more thing. True, none of us will be here at Temple Bethel in 6242. Hey, I won't be here in 2024. But whether or not this synagogue is standing, something in some gut feeling tells me that there will be a Torah, that there will be a Judaism and a Jewish people. In 4,000 years, there will still be Jews, just as the Jewish people and the Jewish idea came to this world around 4,000 years ago. How could our people not persist through the millennia to come? We've just survived genocide. If we can survive that, we can survive anything. If we can survive the Romans, the Inquisition, the Cossacks, Tsars, Soviets, and Nazis, we can survive synagogue shootings or secularization or the protocols of Zion or BDS or the judicial coup. We can even survive Elon Musk, which is more than I can say for Twitter. From a God's eye view, the Jewish people will be here in thousands of years because we've already proven that we can thrive for thousands of years. For 100 generations, our ancestors prayed to return to Jerusalem 3 times a day. 100 generations. If just one generation had stopped facing Jerusalem, we wouldn't be here. Each person mattered. Each prayer recited by each person, it mattered. I wouldn't bet against the Jewish people, despite the great challenges we face now here and in Israel. I wouldn't bet against us. And not because God, which I can say from this God's eye view, will do it, but because of each of you. Each of you matters. And I know you'll come through. Why? Because you are here today. Something mysterious has drawn you back here today. And that's why our little speck, our little bit of time along this journey that we've taken together matters. These 36 years that we've been together, they've mattered. And that's why your life matters. In my life, they've all had a purpose. And all those who are buried next door at Bethel Cemetery, their lives did too. Teach us to count our days. Teach us how to count them. To look at time from God's perspective and see the big picture, the huge picture. That's the key, not just to our relevance, but to our immortality, which rests on the indestructibility of the Jewish people and the Jewish idea. We say in the concluding Torah blessing, Asher natan lanu Torat emet, v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu, who has given us the Torah of truth and eternal life, has been implanted within us. The truth of the Torah transcends time, and so will we. So Psalm 90 teaches us to look at life through heaven's eyes. Frankly, this would be a great place to end the sermon, but I'm not done yet. I got 288 days, 12 hours, 10 minutes, and miles to go before I sleep. So stop potchkieing at home with the brisket, because there are some other ways to recalibrate our concept of time, and I want to go over some of them. Here's another thing. Psalm 90 is telling us to move to France. In France, I could have retired 5 years ago. But why retire at all when everyone spends half the day in a cafe anyway? In fact, in France, and this is true because I read it on the internet, arriving on time to a dinner party is considered rude. The proper etiquette is to arrive 15 minutes late. Their sense of time is so totally different from ours. Teach us, O God, to count our days en français. But you don't need to be in Paris to sit in a cafe. The best-selling poet and essayist Rosh decided to slow time down by stopping to reflect on one special delight for each day. He did it for a year, and his book of delights is delightful. One of his daily reflections, he sees a sign while he's sitting in a cafe in Detroit. It says, "No loitering." Well, he asks, what exactly is it that you're supposed to do in a cafe? Roske notes that loitering implies being unproductive, and that's a crime in America. He adds that it's particularly menacing if you are like him, black, and especially if you're wearing a hoodie. But whatever our ethnic background, we need to learn to let go of the reins and rather than chasing the clock, set a spell and let time come to us. So message 3 of Psalm 90, teach us to count our days and loiter, or better yet, meander. What a word. Just saying meander requires that we meander, sitting in a garden and sipping an iced tea or a fribble. You can't drink that too fast. Brain freeze. In her new book, Saving Time, Discovering a Life Beyond the Clock, Jenny Odell lays out the case for us to recalibrate how we look at time. And she puts it this way, maybe the point isn't to live more, the literal sense of a longer or more productive life, but rather to be more alive in any given moment, a movement outward and across rather than shooting forward on a narrow, lonely track. So living outwardly, that's message 4. And it means embracing each moment as an opportunity to reinvent ourselves, to change our history, and redirect our future. The idea is to find ultimate meaning in every little action and explore the infinite possibilities resulting from every choice. To hear the rhythms of the forest. For a tree, a century is a day. They perceive time so totally differently. Or geological formations, where mountains are still in their adolescence and glaciers are melting away like they're schwitzing on a peloton. The rhythms of gardens growing, birds migrating, beaches eroding, species disappearing, all on interlocking timetables. Each sunrise has its own special rhythm. There is a sunrise every day, but the one that happened this morning, which came through the filter of the periphery of the hurricane, it will never happen again. That's how I want to measure time. And in fact, in our morning prayers, we do with those same sentiments, that every day is a renewal of creation. And each tides shift by half an hour every day. As I stand at the shore, I can feel the tug-of-war between the earth and the moon, shifting so much as the waters come in and go out. Many of you know that Mara and I have just purchased a home in Madison, Connecticut, where we'll be moving 50 miles away, not too far, but on the Red Sox side of the state, safely across what I call the DiMaggio, right near the beach. And already I'm reconnecting with those eternal rhythms of those summers that I used to have on Cape Cod. I'm beginning to slow down and synchronize my inner clock to the rhythms of those undulating crescendos of water, surf, and sand, and to look out over the deep blue swells and see out in the distance Long Island. But that's okay. And right here, we are so fortunate to witness the seasonal dance outside our windows and set our clocks to it. Never underestimate that gift. Each week is different. Each week we reconnect to the eternal rhythms of nature. You can sit in this sanctuary once a week and it'll completely alter your sense of time and bind you to the rhythms of nature and Jewish history. When the beautiful Matthew Klein Garden was put in a few years ago, I was sure it would bury another more modest garden planted on the same spot by our 7th grade class in 2007. The kids took great pride in it, but it was nothing elaborate, maybe 100 randomly planted daffodils in memory of victims of the Holocaust, timed to bloom just before Yom HaShoah. The daffodil symbolizes rebirth, and its appearance signifies the end of the cold, dark days of winter. In some places, it's called February gold. In Israel, one form of it, known as the sea daffodil, blooms later in the year in the harshest heat, when nothing else would grow. It's mentioned in the Song of Songs. and nicknamed Chavatzelet HaSharon, mistranslated as the Rose of Sharon. These intrepid flowers are always racing to push themselves out of the ground when it's too cold or too hot for anything else, proclaiming every year, "We are still here." The daffodil is bold and a little full of itself. It's from the Narcissus family, after all. But in its willingness to be the first to stand up and be counted, it's more like an IDF soldier. "Follow me," it's saying. What better way to both declare the end of the dark winter and bring light to the darkness brought about by the Shoah than to see these biblical flowers in bloom right outside our windows? And so the year after the Klein garden was planted, I paced nervously like a parent waiting for a child to come home from a first date. And sure enough, in mid-March, the first daffodils poked through the ground. They were still there. And every year, right on time, between Purim and Passover, we get a splash of yellow and white. And every year, I celebrate the return of the Chavatzelet to our ground, a little bit of Israel's coastal plain, right out of the Song of Songs, right in our backyard. We're growing the Bible in our garden. And then every year, just a few weeks later, the Klein garden suddenly awakens from its slumber, and its flowers burst into bloom and surround the now withering daffodils as if to escort them back into the earth, thanking them for their service, like our heroic Shoah survivors whom we are now chaperoning through the final years of their lives. This Holocaust Memorial Garden annually proclaims the unbreakable connection of our children to the eternal cycles of nature and Jewish time, and the memory of the 6 million. And I set my springtime watch by those daffodils. And now I leave the Chavatzelet in your care. Watch for them every March, and think of our 7th graders from 2007. Here's another way we can look at time, and this is the last and maybe most important. In her book, Jenny Odell brings up a form of time known among the disability community as crip time. Crip time enables us to live life at a slower pace. Many of you know that my brother Mark in Boston is significantly challenged with Fragile X syndrome. Over the past couple of years, to add to his many health issues, walking has become increasingly difficult for him. And I couldn't see him for a year during COVID, and he gained a lot of weight, and it's just been hard. So he shuffles very slowly, measuring each step, moving one foot and then the other. Once this summer, when I was up there for a visit, it was raining really hard. When we arrived at the parking lot of Panera, he was terrified. I'd never seen him struggle so much. We both got soaked as he grasped my arm tightly. I had no idea how difficult walking had become for him just in the few weeks since my prior visit. It took 15 minutes to get from my car a short distance to the front door. And for those 15 minutes, that became the focal point of our lives. 15 minutes that seemed like hours. I marked time on Mark's time, and I understood what it is like to live on crip time. Odell writes, rather than bend disabled bodies and minds to meet the clock, crip time bends the clock to meet disabled bodies and minds. She adds that disability highlights something that's true for all of us, that no matter how independent we feel, we are not simply alive, we are kept alive. We don't spring up, people don't spring up like mushrooms. We need to be cared for and nurtured throughout our lives by other people. Aliveness means touching and being touched. We're all on different clocks. We walk at different speeds. We learn at different paces. We pray in different rhythms. But in the end, we can't mark time alone. All clocks chime differently, but our goal should be to make them chime in harmony. Teach us to count our days, to measure those paces, so that our hearts may be guided by kindness as we hold out our hand to help our siblings shuffling with a numbing fear through the rain-soaked lot at Panera. Around the beginning of 2020, I was diagnosed with a significant health challenge, which has completely altered the way I measure time. It made me more intentional in dealing with the COVID threat. For me and for us, made me a real pain in the neck. And it has guided my planning for a life beyond the pulpit. But even more, it has made me incredibly appreciative, beyond words, to those who have shown kindness to my family and me over the years, who've gone above and beyond the call to help me to see the world through my eyes, which is hard to do. The kind words that so many of you have offered since I made my emeritus announcement, sharing the memories of our special times together. We'll have more chances to do that. But I've learned how to count my days and my blessings. I visited Mark again last week and took him out to dinner at Coolidge Corner. I'm happy to say that it went better. He's doing better. He's walking. And as I held my brother's hand drenched in that parking lot and saw how dependent he was on me, and in a strange way, me on him, I realized that however we mark time, our time is meant to be shared. Today is Shabbat. The very fact that Shabbat supersedes Rosh Hashanah and we don't blow the shofar today is a key sign that from the Jewish perspective, the relentless march of time needs to pause, needs to take a back seat to this weekly taste of eternity. It's a lesson we all need to learn, even if it means delaying our shofar gratification for one day. And we need to sit back and cherish our remaining time together. Rosh Hashanah is about our rush, rush, rush to get things done. Shabbat is about the appreciation of what we've done already. Rosh Hashanah is the fourth rush of a Tekiah Gedola, the waves of sound that are created. Shabbat is a light breeze that ripples across the surface of the water. Shabbat ever reminds us, as does Rosh Hashanah, that this too shall pass. Hayom Harat Olam. Today the world is born. We'll be singing it in a few minutes, but we'll hold our breath one day more before celebrating that birthday tomorrow with the shofar's blast. Once a busy merchant went to the Rabbi of Lechkowitz and asked how he might gain humility. While he spoke, the clock struck the hour, and the Rebbe said, "This is your answer. Nothing should humble us more than the striking of a clock. We know that another hour of our lives has passed, and we should think, what have I done in this hour, and how have I improved my soul through the service of God?" The clock humbles us for sure, but it also liberates us to take control of each day, each moment, and live our lives to the fullest, which we can do on Shabbat. And so I call on all of us to set our lives to the rhythms of nature, to the undulations of Jewish time, of memory and beauty. Meander through your days, live intentionally, find your place in the vastness of eternity. Set your watches to the pace of the one who is struggling to keep up, and always extend your hand. See the path of hope, bolstered by the belief that our lives do matter. Be grateful for every moment we've shared together. Our time has mattered. And if you don't know it by now, we'll know it in 4,000 years. And next March, as we watch our daffodils herald yet another new spring in honor of our precious students and in memory of our martyrs, we'll hearken to the opening verse of Isaiah 35. The desert and the parched land will be glad. The wilderness will rejoice and blossom. It will burst into bloom like the chavatzelet. It will rejoice greatly and shout for joy. And as I read these words, I realize that I'm a lot like the Chavatzelet, the daffodil bursting at the starting gate, always in a bit of a hurry, chomping at the bit to share joyous tidings with our darkened, wintry world. Tomorrow we'll arise and realize that the hour is late and there is much work to be done. But for today, Shabbat, let us rejoice greatly in the time that we've had, and in the remaining time we have. Let us count our days, stand proudly like the Chavatzelet, shout for joy, and party like it's New Year's Rockin' Eve, 22,203. I look forward to seeing you then.